Good afternoon and welcome to our fourth and final session of Uncovering Hawkeye History. I'm your host, David McCartney, and I serve as the University Archivist at the University of Iowa Special Collections and University Archives. I started in this role back in January of 2001, which means I've been chronicling the university's history and materials for over 20 years. Those of you who read the Iowa magazine may recognize me by my column called Old Gold, where I've been able to share some of the remarkable elements of our collections in the Department of Special Collections with our readers for about the past 13 years, including the columns run in Iowa Now. Since 1847, the University of Iowa has broken barriers and blazed new trails as a beacon for learning, creativity, and collaboration. Today's event is part of the university's celebration of our 175-year history, and I've been honored to be your host of this four-part series, which we will be wrapping up tonight. We've identified a mix of faculty, staff, and alumni to be featured throughout the series, with each session highlighting aspects of distinction for the university, both during different points of its history, as well as opportunities for future growth. Each session has live closed captioning and will be recorded and shared on our YouTube channel at a future date. We encourage you to share the session with Iowa friends and family who might not be able to join us live today. Last week, we heard from three Iowa faculty: Kevin Washburn, the N. William Hines Dean and Professor of Law in the University of Iowa College of Law; four-time alumnus and Professor of Otolaryngology, Dr. Bruce Gantz, who received his degrees at the bachelor's and doctorate level through the 1960s until 1980, the world's first doctor to perform a robot-assisted cochlear implant surgical procedure; and Ed Wasserman, Dewey Stewart Professor of Experimental Psychology, who explored many Iowa innovations last week. If you missed last week's session, we did record it, and we hope to add it to the YouTube channel yet this month. Today's session is on the next chapter, Blazing New Trails, somewhat focusing on the university's history from 1998 to the present and beyond. Resiliently rebuilding and reinventing, Iowa is entering its next phase, poised to continue pursuing new discoveries to change the world. We are joined today by three dedicated University of Iowa administrators, whom I'll introduce to you throughout the program. You can submit your questions at any time for any panelist using the Q&A functionality on your computer screen. We are covering a lot of ground today, but we will try to ask as many questions as time allows. So to begin with, I'm going to once again share a quotation. I've done this for each of the previous three sessions. I'll do so again today, especially for the benefit of those of you who are joining us today for the first time. This is a quotation from the first report of the faculty to the Board of Trustees. This was back in 1858, just 3 years after the first classes were held on our campus, and barely a decade after the establishment of the University of Iowa. The report of the faculty was submitted to the Board of Trustees, now of course the State Board of Regents, at a time when there was much optimism, even at a time of great challenge and impoverishment that the university was facing. And the quotation that I would like to share with you is as follows. We regard it as no small honor to have been the first laborers, the first working faculty organized in an institution which we believe is destined at no distant day to take a high and noble stand among similar institutions in our land. That quotation from the first faculty report issued in 1858. Our discussion today will be centering around several themes concerning the university's present-day status and prospects of future growth. But we can't really address the present without addressing the past. We, after all, don't necessarily operate in a vacuum. We operate in a continuum. That's what history is. It's a continuing narrative. And just for fun, I thought I would share a couple of stories concerning the campus landscape, and to, I think, serve as an affirmation that change is often inevitable, if not reliably inevitable, even on a durable, seemingly durable historic campus. And I'm going to quote from a couple of, I'm going to plagiarize myself here for a few minutes, if I may, and quote from a couple of columns I wrote for the Old Gold series that involve the changing landscape of the Pentecrest. And the first is one that concerns what we know of today as Calvin Hall, which is, as many of you know, located just north of the Pentecrest and slightly to the west of southwest, essentially, from the old Capitol. And you might call it a case of rearranging the furniture back in 1905, because Calvin Hall was not always located where it happens to be today. So we begin with a couple in their new living room at their home, arguing over where to place the new couch. I think it's just fine right there, dear. No, honey, I think it would look better over there. And so this argument continues, and you very well might conclude that the same conversation could well have taken place among administrators of the State University of Iowa back in the years leading up to 1905. They were not talking about furniture in their offices, at least not that we know of, but they were instead weighing, so to speak, the possibility of moving a 6,000-ton building off the central campus. This all began shortly after George McLean became the university's 8th president back in 1899, when he announced a plan to redesign the central campus, giving it its appearance today. The 4 neoclassical buildings flanking the old Capitol. At the time, though, a half dozen buildings of, we can charitably say, various styles stood in the way, including Science Hall, which is now Calvin Hall. And at that time, it was located northeast of Old Capitol at the site of present-day McBride Hall. Now, although Science Hall had been constructed just less than 20 years before, it was clear that the brick design of Science Hall, now Calvin, would not mesh with McLean's vision of a planned and rather monolithic, architecturally harmonious central campus. Tearing down Science Hall was one option, but there were 2 members of the faculty, Thomas McBride and Samuel Calvin, who campaigned against destroying a perfectly fine building. Instead, they proposed moving the building to its present-day location at the northwest corner of Jefferson Street and North Capitol. And so after much debate, the university's leadership agreed, and they awarded a contract to a Chicago company to move the building. And this happened from late spring through the summer of 1905. The building was moved by a crew using an elaborate series of rollers, jacks, and turning jack screws. Classes continued to be held in the building that summer. This is clearly an OSHA violation, had OSHA existed at that time. And despite the size of that building, it did not experience any cracks or other damage from the move. A typical day's move was perhaps 3 to 5 feet. The longest one-day stretch was 17 feet. It also had to be turned around completely 180 degrees so that its front entrance would face Market Street from the north instead of from the original south side of street orientation. So this was quite an accomplishment, and it paved the way for completion of the central campus. By 1924, the last of the 4 present-day buildings adjacent to Old Capitol was completed, although Old Dental, to the north of Old Capitol on the Pentecrest, and the last of the non-conforming central campus structures was not torn down until 1975. So that leads to my other story concerning our central campus landscape. Pardon my pun here, the extraction of old dental. Sorry, I can hear the groans now. It might not come as any surprise that a building by that name would be the last extraction. The building was constructed in 1894. As I said, it was torn down in 1975. And the destruction of Old Dental represented the final step toward completion of the central campus as envisioned by President McLean back at the turn of the 20th century. Old Dental was the second home of the College of Dentistry. It was designed to accommodate a program that was attracting a rapidly growing enrollment in the late 19th century. It was situated immediately north of Old Capitol at the corner of Capitol and Jefferson, a three-story brick and wooden structure that had already reached capacity when its doors opened for classes in 1895. It very quickly became out of date in that regard, and there was not much, if any, room for growth. By that time, there were a half dozen buildings on campus, as I mentioned before, representing a mishmash of design that appeared around the old Capitol. And over time, these buildings were removed either by fire or by deliberately moving, as was the case with Science, later Calvin Hall, or demolition, which eventually was the case of Old Dental. There is more about the background of how this campus design came into being. I won't go into any detail about that, except to note that the report is in the university archives. We're on the third floor of the main library. The report is entitled "The Report of the Olmsted Brothers Outlining Plans for Future Arrangement of the Grounds and Buildings of the State University of Iowa." This was published by the university, independently by the university in 1905. And as I mentioned, it's available for review in the university archives. The stalwart building known as Old Dental remained ensconced until the mid-1970s. And during that time, from the time that Old Dental became so named Old Dental, the College of Dentistry moved to another location in about 1917. For the next 60 or so years, the building had a number of different purposes. The printing plant, for example, was installed in Old Dental in 1927. The Department of Buildings and Grounds moved into the building at that same time. And over the years, a number of academic programs, including psychology and art, had taken up shop there. And there were also administrative offices, including financial aid. But by 1975, time had caught up with Old Dental. By that time, it was rife with a number of safety hazards, and the decision to remove Old Dental was made actually quite some time before, but the actual demolition did not take place until 1975. And at last, the Pentacrest could truly live up to its name accurately as a setting for 5 architecturally harmonizing edifices. You could call it a perfect set of teeth. I'm sorry, I couldn't resist. Well, let's get on with our program today. Our first guest is alumnus Rod Leonards, who serves as the Senior Vice President of Finance and Operations and as the campus architect. Rod started at the University of Iowa in 1994 as an architect and project manager, and he has lived much of the history that he'll be discussing today. He is also the author of the book, The University of Iowa Guide to Campus Architecture, which he co-authored with John Scott, former Elizabeth M. Stanley Professor of the Arts at the University of Iowa. This is a book that my office consults very frequently when we receive questions from patrons. Rod will be speaking on the history of his role as Iowa's campus architect, one of the coolest jobs on campus, I would have to say. And he'll also talk about some of the opportunities that he's had the good fortune to facilitate when it comes to the changing nature of the campus's physical footprint. Rod, thank you very much for joining us, and we're eager to hear your presentation.
Thank you very much, David, and also congratulations. It's an honor to have you leading us off and hosting us today, and congratulations on your great career. I've really enjoyed opportunities we've had to work together and reminisce about a lot. So, and your stories are in line with the things that I love to talk about and am glad to share today. And also thank you, Tony Hakes, for taking the wheel on the PowerPoint presentation I will give. And if you don't mind, as we go slide by slide, I'll let you know and we'll go. I appreciate everyone's time and hope you enjoy this. Quick look, as it says, a future formed by our past. My emphasis is to be on today and moving forward, and I'll touch on that. But as this phrase says, and as David pointed out, so much of what we are today at the University of Iowa is based on where we've been over this 175 years. And so I'd like to touch on some of those, Tony. I don't want to dwell heavily in some of what David says. I will dovetail with here early on, but I think it's important when we're looking at the architecture of our campus and our campus physical structure to remember the major milestones that made us who we are at the University of Iowa. And of course, it starts, with the Capitol building. We call it the old Capitol. In 1842, when it was built, it was just the Capitol building. And those were the Capitol grounds. In fact, there were contracts in the early years. You can see a photograph in the upper right-hand corner of the 1865 memorial when Lincoln was assassinated. And at that time, the building was part of the University of Iowa, and faculty contracts included roles to keep livestock off of the Capitol grounds, of the former Capitol grounds. So everybody was pitching in. And it was important to pitch in because we had an austere start for the University of Iowa. In fact, our founding in 1847 led to our first classes not until 1855. Amos Dean, our first president. And the building that I point out is a building that does not exist anymore. In fact, we're too deep on that site. That is Mechanics Academy. It was a building not built by the University of Iowa or for it, but was a classroom building. And in 1855, the University of Iowa held its first classes in the building. The building, as it's shown in the photograph, was positioned on Lynn Street and on the site of what we recently would have called the Seashore Hall site. In 1899, and in the years that led up to 1899 and the opening of our new hospital, the University of Iowa was in effect our first hospitals and clinics built on the site of Mechanics Academy. And in fact, the building materials of Mechanics Academy were used for the foundation of the hospital and the building we refer to later as Seashore Hall. Over time, the hospital moved westward, 1918, and then ultimately the Gothic towers of the General Hospital in 1928. But this was our humble beginning. And Tony, if you go to the next slide, we did have an austere first half a century with the University of Iowa. The Morill Act, which advanced across our country as a federal funding source for land grant universities, funneled most of the federal funds for higher education to the land grant institutions, and in our case, Iowa State. So as David pointed out, we had a number of relatively low cost buildings placed around the old Capitol in the early years. But then came the 1893 World's Fair in Chicago, the Columbian Exposition. If you've ever read the book, The Devil in the White City, it's a story, a novel regarding that remarkable event in Chicago. And I put an inset of a gentleman who had an important part to play in the tale that David shared. Henry Van Brunt was one of the key architects as a part of the Chicago World's Fair. And on his way back to his hometown, Kansas City, after the fair in 1893, he stopped into the University of Iowa and tried and was evidently successful in convincing the University of Iowa that we needed to surround that great former old Capitol building with what they did in Chicago. The introduction of the city beautiful Beaux-Arts classical larger than life what they called the Great White City, but it was the use of limestone. And he urged the university to create a special place for the university and for the community. And over the next quarter century, we did just that. And there is the inset, the upper right-hand corner, referring to what David talked about when we took Science Hall and turned it and moved it across the street in 1905. Quite an amazing feat, but also evidence of our tight pocketbook at the time, not wanting to give away a single square foot, despite the challenges of moving that building across the street. So Tony, we'll take the next slide. As we continued history at the university, another major marker in the history of our campus and development of our campus occurred. Many often refer to it as a partnership with Frank Seiberling, who was running our Art and Art History program, President Howard Bowen, who approached the Board of Regents about the importance of notable architecture and world-renowned architecture as a representation of our university and its creativity. But you'll notice I included one other person for selfish purposes. George Horner was hired by the University of Iowa in 1930 and was the first university architect in the country when he was hired. He was a 1928 graduate of the University of Illinois School of Architecture, came here in 1930 and worked with the University of Iowa until 1975 and helped guide the planning. Many of the buildings that we have through the first half of the 20th century were credited to George Horner's design and the partnerships he had in design. But ultimately, the success that Frank Seiberling and President Bowen had with our Board of Regents ushered in an era of iconic architects and iconic architecture. You see two examples here. The first of those, and the first on our campus, was the 1969 Museum of Art building, followed shortly after that by Hancher Auditorium in 1972, both designed by Max Abramovitz. Max Abramovitz was one of the world's most recognizable and recognized architects at the time. He had done Avery Fisher Hall in New York City, as well as the United Nations building. And interestingly enough, in picking that architect, he was a 1928 Illinois classmate of George Horner's. And so they came back together to partner on these two buildings that, Tony, if you go to the next slide, led to several decades of remarkable architecture on our campus that I have always shared are evidence of our campus's creativity, but also of our community's creativity. Some of the examples I show here, and these are only some of them. 1983 Carver Hawkeye Arena represented our first National Design Award-winning building. And you can see Frank Gehry's IATL building in the upper right, Charles Gwathmey's Levitt Center in the lower left, and of course, Stephen Hull's great building, Art Building West. These buildings marked our campus, made our campus beautiful, but also put us on the map. These are all renowned buildings, recognized and awarded nationally and internationally. In fact, the Royal Institute of British Architects rated Stephen Hull's Art Building West as one of the top 8 building designs in the world. And so it was a rich period of architectural history and really a walking modern history campus that we host here. Tony, everything was great until 2008. And as for the many of you who were with us and survived this remarkable and tragic event that hit the University of Iowa and hit Cedar Rapids and hit much of all of Eastern Iowa, so many suffered from this. Those of us who were on the ground for the events of the flood in June of 2008, remember the harrowing days when we lost 1/6 of our campus to the flood waters. 24% of our general assignment classrooms were flooded. 22 major buildings. We set a mark with that 500-year flood that still makes us the largest individual owner partner in FEMA history with a $750 million disaster. And we knew we had hard days ahead of us, but the next slide shows you, in my mind, what we're about. And in the days before the flood, in the days immediately after it, when we had only a month and a half before the largest class in the history of our campus would come to this campus, we matured physically, yes, over 10 years, but we matured as a family and as a university immediately. People coming out, you can see thousands of people trying to protect the campus. And then the work of faculty and students and staff, the perseverance, the patience to survive the first few months and get through it, and then begin the long trek toward recovery and protection of our campus in partnership with our state agencies, our legislators, and with the federal government. The next slide. It emerged after years of effort to a campus that is better than it has ever been. And some examples of the work and the perseverance shown here, again, with another building by Stephen Hull, our visual arts building, the Boxman Music Building right smack in the middle of downtown. Then, of course, Hancher Auditorium, which became a symbol for the recovery of our campus and the reemergence of our campus after that flood recovery. We're proud to have survived and persevered that time, but no doubt it was another marker for the development of our campus and what our campus represents. Next slide and final slide, I think, Tony, in a look ahead as we continue to advance our campus. Of course, the health care element on our campus, you can see the Children's Hospital there and the meaningful presence it has above Kinnick Stadium and as a skyline feature for our campus. We will continue to develop, as we have developed and shared with the Board of Regents, a 10-year vision for the development and care for the citizens of the state. We're very excited this coming fall in August when we will christen the final piece of our flood recovery, really the Stanley Museum of Art. We're moving the art back in as we speak, and we will be opening that building as the students arrive next fall. And then I show also in the lower right-hand corner our Papa John Business Building, built in 1993. Our Tippie College of Business has grown, has doubled in size since that time. So those kinds of developments come our way. And I would be remiss, and maybe Lynette was going to bring it up, but as I mentioned, the Tippie College of Business, a dear friend to the entire university, one of truthfully the greatest donors we have known, and even a greater man, Henry Tippie, passed this year after a full and amazing life and great partnerships and inspiration for our entire campus. And so I'd be remiss as we look forward not to look back at those who have created who we are and our future, as you can see, formed by our past. And we go right back to the beginning. Our greatest priorities on the Pentacrest, bringing the academic core to life with renewal of the buildings of the Pentacrest and a likely future partnership with our state as we fund the repair and the modernization of those special Pentacrest buildings. And with that, David, I will turn it over back to you and the rest of our presenters.
Rod, thank you very much. Thank you also for remembering Henry Tippie, a great citizen of Iowa, and will certainly be remembered for a very long time on our campus. A remarkable legacy. We have a couple of questions for you, Rod, and it was just fascinating. In such a short period of time, you went through a very remarkable summary of the changes that have affected our campus over the last, particularly the last 20 or so years. Are there plans to or dreams, if you will, to move a building across campus like we did with Calvin Hall back in
well, first, Calvin Hall.
We kind of did that with Shambaugh House.
Absolutely. It isn't the only time we've done it. Calvin Hall actually represents the oldest university-built building on our campus, which makes it very special, not just for its special story of relocation, but built in 1885. It is the oldest of our buildings. Now, the Cool House, which the Iowa Press, it's their home on the other side of the river, is the oldest building on our campus at 1841 birth date. We did move the Shambaugh House about 3 blocks to the north up Clinton Street and across the street, home, of course, to Chris Merrill and our international writing program, part of our writers' neighborhood. One of the really, really, truly exciting and proud-filled pride moments for the University of Iowa is our writing, as we all know, and that part of our campus is special because of the Writers' Workshop in the Dye House. And in fact, we are very excited to start a project looking forward that will be directly across the street from the President's residence at the corner of Church and Clinton Street, which will be our #1 rated nonfiction writing program. We'll have a new home, fully gift supported project. Thank you, Lynette and team, Jane Van Voorhees and others working hard to garner the dollars to allow us to move forward with the project. Later in March, we'll start construction, and that will become the new home for the nonfiction writing program, another addition to this special writers neighborhood. But yeah, those are examples of 2 buildings that have moved. None other. It's difficult to move buildings, especially brick ones. It's a remarkable move that occurred in 1905, 2 feet a day.
That was an exceptional episode, and probably may not ever be repeated again successfully. I'm not sure how it was accomplished, but it was a great question anyway.
Yeah,
I have another question from one of our participants. When was the first engineering building, or where rather was the first engineering building located, and what was it called? And the questioner writes, I heard it burned down and was replaced by the building currently at Washington and Capitol Streets. I'm wondering if perhaps the first applied science classes were offered in the Mechanics Academy building. And then
yeah, they likely were. We would have started with some courses in engineering, I think, from the very beginning, and the Mechanics Academy probably hosted those. We really used every square foot we had. Keep in mind, the old Capitol included gym space and library space and College of Law. Every building was used flexibly for those purposes. And as you pointed out, we lost some to fire the library originally on the Pentecrest. But in 1904, we built the building that was referred to by the question, and a nice question regarding engineering. We've obviously occupied a good part of that entire block for the advancement of our engineering programs, but it started in 1904 with the engineering building that was designed to emulate architecturally and through its materials the great architecture of the Pentecrest in the limestone appointments. Some of that has changed over time as the building has progressed to the south, but still has its home, and the dean's office is within that original 1904 building.
Rod Leonards, thank you so much for your information, your enlightening presentation. Really, every time I hear you speak and recount the university's architectural heritage, I just beam with pride. And
there's so much to be proud of. And I take a great deal of humility being here with you today, but also in representing the university on this front. It's been, as you said, pretty cool job, and very rewarding. So thank you.
Thank you for joining us, Rod, and stay with us. We will have, I'm sure, more questions for you toward the end of our session. Our next guest is dual alumnus Peter Mathis, the Vice President for External Relations and the Senior Advisor to President Wilson at the University of Iowa. Peter joined the University of Iowa staff 11 years ago to serve as the Director of Federal Relations and as Assistant Vice President for Community Relations. And during his tenure, Peter has spearheaded several programs to help support the university's public mission for the state of Iowa and for the nation. Peter, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, and I'm just excited to have an opportunity. It's always difficult to follow Rod, so hopefully his dulcet tones I'll be able to get past and hopefully provide some education for folks. So thank you all for attending. It's individuals like you, supporters of this institution, that one of the reasons why we come to work every day, first and foremost, obviously the students, but being able to serve the institution that you love. And for folks such as you, it really is a remarkable opportunity. So what I like to talk to you all about today is something I think I've learned over my career, but you know, as you sit around long enough, you realize that the history of not only the institution, but the history of what occurs within a specific organization tends to repeat itself. And so I always look at it as, okay, what's old is new again. You know, it's a standard old saw that people use, but it really is fascinating, especially when you've been around for 175 years. Tony, you want to advance? So I always tend to like to use history as a guide to understand where we are at today based upon that history, and then how do we structure where we want to go into the future. And so, you know, over the past 3 decades, we've definitely seen a shift in the way in which higher education is paid for. From when, in particular, when I was a student here, there was a significant amount of support from the state, and that has shifted dramatically. But again, if you utilize history as the example, you go back to 1914, 1915, state support 75%. And then all of a sudden there was a significant shift that occurred over 15, 16 years. And so then all of a sudden those resources got built back up over those subsequent 40, 50 years to get to where we were in the early 80s. And then it's been 30 years of a general decline. But that doesn't mean that just because we're in this decline, it's going to continue to decline. I always view that as an opportunity, especially given where the past was, that there is a reason to believe that there is an opportunity to increase that long-term support. And part of that goes to, as I think about some of the interesting little stories that I've learned in my time here at the institution, and I don't know if a whole lot of folks know, but at a certain point in time in the history of our institution, we, the University of Iowa, we were actually suspended from the Big Ten. So if you go back to April of 1929, the president at that point in time, President Jessup, asked that the AD resign for a couple different reasons. Number one, the football program was not being effective. And so you had some outside folks asking for some changes within the athletic department. What's old is new again. And so as we take a look at what occurred from that, the AD ended up resigning. And then the AD went to the commissioner of the Big Ten at that point in time and said that the donors had gotten control of the university and the athletics department. As I think you all know, the Big Ten has prided ourselves that we are very much driven and managed by the presidents or the universities. And so from that point, the Big Ten commissioner, without asking the university what was going on, ended up suspending the university from the Big Ten in May of 1929, effective the 1st of January, 1930. By the time all of this occurred, the university came back and said, whoa, here's what's actually happening. That suspension was rescinded in February 1st, 1930. But again, it provided me an anchor to think through how quickly the ability to move information, even back in the 1929, and how quickly something can spin out of control if you are not proactive in the way in which you engage. Something similar happened when we take a look at what occurred in late 1930, beginning of 1931, again, underneath President Jessup. In December of 1930, the Cedar Rapids Gazette Republican, what is now just the Cedar Rapids Gazette, there was the individual who's the editor of the paper, really did not like President Jessup, had it in for whatever reason, and was writing multiple scathing editorials about President Jessup's management of the institution. And the governor at that point in time, state of Iowa, took those articles and realized that, oh, this is an opportunity perhaps to open up and have a dialogue. And asked the General Assembly to put together a committee to engage and review the university, in particular President Jessup. And so over the spring of 1931, they ended up having 6 weeks of testimony, 75 witnesses, and over 6,000 pages of testimony. So when we think about our engagement with the General Assembly, and our politics writ large within the state of Iowa, the idea that it's bad or it's never been worse than it is today. I always go back to 1931. If you've got 6 weeks of testimony, 75 witnesses, 6,000 pages, and at the end of the day, both sides claim victory, even though, there was nothing found and everybody moved on. But at that point in time, President Jessup also decided that he had had enough with public universities. Then we move forward to the 60s. And there was a fascinating photo and actually really a lovely article put into the Iowa Magazine, must have been multiple years ago, that illustrated the history of protest on our campus, and in particular, the use of Old Cap as a staging ground and an ability as a background for students, community members to utilize it as a focal point and as a way to gather. And as we went through the protests a couple summers ago, that came back again. And so as Rod and I were talking about what was occurring, and we sort of always reflected back onto what happened in the 60s. And again, it is history repeating itself over and over again, and how best to help folks continue to move through becomes our goal. Finally, as we take a look at the scope competition relationships, the idea of having duplicative programs on university campuses is again a debate that is nearly as old as the institution. There has now been, up into 1950, there was 3 different studies that focused on this idea of duplication from Iowa State and University of Iowa, and a bit with UNI as well. And it became so contentious at a certain point that when President Hilton at Iowa State became president, there was President Hancher was more or less fed up with the way in which Iowa State was being funded by the state, and the failure of the Board of Regents to engage in a way that allowed for a differentiation between the institutions. And all of this ended up leading to the Iowa State, which was Iowa State College, becoming Iowa State University. And then for us having to actually change our name to the University of Iowa in 1964 underneath President Bowen, because we used to be known as State University, or our official name is State University of Iowa, but we were the State University of Iowa up until 1964, just generally known. So as when we think about Ohio State, for example, trying to coin the, if we wouldn't have changed our name, we could have probably owned the as well. Go on to the next slide, please. So as we think about engaging in and trying to make decisions as a university, as a public institution, it actually is sort of this interesting nexus between state politics, national politics, and campus politics. And the 3 rarely ever align together. And so the university has to go ahead and work with our Board of Regents, with you, our constituents, with state politicians, and our shared governance folks, which are faculty, staff, and student leadership, in order to find a way to bridge the gaps that exist. And so while there's many times in which campus politics, the small p that I call, is a predominant voice that is heard, especially in our community, the job of this institution, the leadership of this institution, is how to balance that versus where the state politics exist or the national politics, because that is simply a mirror of where the state is at or the nation is at. And we as a public institution have to balance all of those competing aspects. Next slide, please. The good thing is that even though we are balancing all of those different aspects, the institution in the state of Iowa is perceived exceptionally well. And even after the several very challenging years from 2019 through 2021, we've consistently been able to manage the ability to have a positive view at within the state of Iowa, to move from 86% favorable opinion with 14% unfavorable, up to right now 89% favorable and 11% unfavorable. We take that as we are managing this institution in a way that is both true to the core mission of our university and to our values, while recognizing the needs of the state of Iowa. Go to the next slide, please. And so what can you do? What can you do to continue to help us, help the university, help our current students, future students? Number one is please access the resources that exist. So Hawkeye Caucus is the university's arm that helps to rally folks together to engage legislators. And that is an opportunity, again, for you to obtain information, sign up for email database, et cetera. But it really is a resource for you to use. Engage with our office community engagement. There's a lot of information both to access what is available to you in your local community and also what's going on on campus. I found the Iowa Magazine over the past several years has really matured into what can and probably should be the definitive piece about what is the University of Iowa and how we are available to impact the future of the state and the nation. And then as always, social media these days is the easiest and best way to continue to find out what is happening at the institution. By obtaining those resources and helping to continue to educate yourself, really the key is for you to continue to engage your neighbors. You are our best asset. You have an affinity for this institution. You have illustrated your love for this institution by sitting down and listening to us when we have a wonderful basketball game coming up in 40 some odd minutes. And that is, we need your voice engaging with your neighbors, your friends. That third-party validation is crucial. Engage with your local legislators. These are the folks that help to think about not only the resources that the institution can be afforded each and every year, but also the policies that help to manage it. And that is also exceedingly important as we think about the future. And then as we think about the future of both UICA and the university, we are actively engaged with communities across the state and the nation. And the more we can see you and engage, the happier we are. So thank you for your time today.
Peter, thank you very much for a perspective that really, for me, is a very beneficial reset button, really, to understand the challenges that the university administration faces, but also the stature of the university with regard to our fellow Iowans. It was gratifying to see that graph. I often wonder, what is our perception outstate? And it's reaffirming to know that we're on the right track with regard to our commitment to Iowans. So thank you for sharing that information with us. We do have a couple of questions for you. You mentioned that we should talk about Iowa to our neighbors, our legislators. If there's only one thing that would be highlighted, what would you want me to tell them if I were to engage in that?
Wow, that is a great question. So I think first and foremost is the value that you have obtained from the university. And it's not just in the classroom. So for me, it was actually the undergraduate research I did with Professor Chuck Shipman back in 1999 to understand how the impact of LCV scores, lead conservation voter scores on specific, it was that learning that allowed me to apply that to the rest of my career, and that it's not just a linear progression through my career or my life. It is those basic pieces, at least for me, was liberal arts and humanities that allowed me to be able to want to learn for the rest of my life. That sort of understanding about what this type of education can provide, that really is crucial because that is the value proposition of a public 4-year R1 AAU institution for our citizens, our students, our kids.
Thank you. You mentioned your undergraduate experience, and we have a question here along those lines. When you graduated from Iowa, was it your plan to work at the university? How did you end up in the position that you're you're holding?
That's a great question. So I actually worked for Congressman Leach out in Washington, D.C. And Derek Willard, who was the long time federal lobbyist, would come out and visit the office. And I remember thinking, oh, that's interesting. I didn't know the university had a lobbyist. That's fantastic. And so it was then that, this must 2001-ish, I was thinking that would be a really neat job to have. And so left Jim's office and worked at state capitol for 8 years. And then there was the opportunity to start as the director of federal relations and was lucky enough to get the job. And I tell you what, there is nothing that brings you can tell when people have passion about something. Every single time I talk about this institution, I get excited, and that translates, especially when you're trying to convince legislators or members of Congress to support. So I was lucky enough to fall into the position, and as far as I'm concerned, if I'm here for another 33 years, I'm going to be a happy man.
If there's a way you can patent that enthusiasm for the rest of us, Peter, please let me know. And the rest of us know as well. It would be great to pick up on even more of that. One more question before we move on to our next panelist, Peter. How can out-of-state alumni advocate for Iowa? We have many people who live outside of Iowa, and they may or may not necessarily have direct contact with our legislators, but there are ways for them to advocate as well.
Absolutely. So first and foremost, continue to talk to your friends and neighbors, because we never know when that friend or neighbor may have a child, grandkid, a nephew, a niece that would be potentially interested in the University of Iowa. I think that's the engagement from that perspective is very important. The other piece is when you're speaking to potentially your members of Congress, the importance of research funding is critical to not only the future of our nation, but the future of the University of Iowa. Again, as a R1 institution, AAU institution, our future and our students benefit from having faculty who have opportunities to do pioneering research and bring that directly to them in their classrooms. That's the beauty of a place like this. And so when you have the opportunity to advocate for additional research funding wherever you are at, it pays dividends. It helps the University of Iowa.
Peter Mathis, thank you very, very much for your time this afternoon. We will have time for more questions for Peter as time allows at the end of our program. Our next guest is Lynette Marshall, the president and CEO of the University of Iowa Center for Advancement. Lynette came to Iowa in 2006 to lead what was then the University of Iowa Foundation. During her tenure, the foundation has experienced record performance and growth, and it has become a national leader in creating a campus culture of philanthropy. Following the merger of the foundation with the UI Alumni Association, Lynette now leads the organization's mission to advance the University of Iowa through engagement and philanthropy. And she joins us today to speak about the impact that advancement has had on the University of Iowa during this time. Lynette, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon.
Oh, thank you so much, David. And I would like to add my congratulations to you on a remarkable career as our university archivist. You have a very cool job, and we've been fortunate to have your partnership in the Alumni Iowa magazine through the years. So thank you. And it's a joy for me to be able to join with Peter and Rod in presenting the third leg of this and talking a little bit, as David says, about the philanthropic and engagement support of the University of Iowa through the years. So while we have been talking a lot about the most recent 25 years for the university, I do also want to add a little bit of context about the history of philanthropic support before I go into some of the other things. So when you think about the creation of the University of Iowa Foundation, it really starts with Sandy Boyd in a wonderful way. As a young faculty member in the College of Law, President Hancher asked then Professor Boyd to go out to the other Big Ten institutions and find out how they were organizing their fundraising for their universities and come back with a recommendation. And on February 25th, this is an interesting and important date, I think 1957, it was the 110th anniversary of the University of Iowa. Professor Boyd actually was able to file the Articles of Incorporation for the brand new University of Iowa Foundation. And I was especially interested in that, knowing that this Friday is February 25th, when we will be celebrating the 175th anniversary of the university. So it was a fun discovery as I was looking through some of the history to know when that was established. And in the foundation's very first year, there were 1,300 donors who donated a total of $28,000 to the University of Iowa. And from there, the tradition of giving has increased and expanded every year. The launch of the very first campaign came relatively quickly in the life of philanthropy at the university. In 1964, Owen and Leon Elliott from Cedar Rapids offered their art collection to the university. And in order to provide a suitable museum for that collection, the foundation launched its first campaign for $1 million to construct the original University of Iowa Museum of Art. And in the following years, now what we know as the University of Iowa Center for Advancement has continued to grow. And what a coincidental and lovely image here of the Henry B. Tippie College of Business entrance in the week that we have lost our dear friend, Henry Tippie. The goal for philanthropy initially started as providing the margin of excellence, and that is certainly still our goal for working with people who want to support the university. As a top-tier public university, though, as Peter has mentioned, Iowa faces increased funding challenges. You saw that data. And with decades of decreasing state and federal support for public universities, donations of all sizes for the university are important and provide that remarkable support. Donors help us change the campus landscape in many ways, providing unprecedented support for faculty, providing access for our students, and launching some of the very largest scholarly ideas that change lives. When I think about how dramatically our campus has changed, I immediately think about the historic floods that Rod mentioned from 2008. I arrived on campus a couple of years before that in 2006, and in the 2 years before that tragic flood, we were already talking about new campus facility needs, including a new recreation and wellness center, a new building for the College of Pharmacy, and we also had conversations about a new children's hospital and much more. After the flood, of course, which caused more than $800 million worth of damage and decimated our arts campus, the list of campus needs then, of course, grew exponentially. And over the next 10 years, more than $200 million was raised in philanthropy to help renovate and rebuild important buildings. You're all familiar with the new homes for Hancher, for the Voxman Music Building, as well as for the Visual Arts Building. And we are absolutely thrilled that this year we will also have the privilege of opening the new University of Iowa Stanley Museum of Art. Donors have helped us add to the Iowa City skyline. We opened the Papa John Biomedical Discovery Building in 2009, giving our researchers collaborative space and resources, as well as what you see here, the magnificent new University of Iowa Stead Family Children's Hospital. Overall, more than 11,000 donors from all 50 states have supported the Stead Family Children's Hospital to be able to allow us to have a dedicated home for children and their families who are in need. And it fills a remarkable void that we had prior to that. I'd like to share with you a brief video that we put together for those supporters of the Children's Hospital when we opened it 5 years ago.
We've been waiting a long time, but soon the new University of Iowa Stead Family Children's Hospital will open and start helping kids feel better. Our new hospital is built just for us. That means it will be bright and welcoming so that everyone who comes here will feel safe and at home. Lots of people made this dream come true, from our families who gave us tips on how to create a fun and friendly space, to the construction crews who built this huge building. We want to thank everyone who has helped, especially you. Thanks for giving to the Children's Hospital. Because of you, a lot of kids will be treated in a brand new hospital that is just as awesome as our doctors and nurses have always been. Thank you for helping University of Iowa Stead Family Children's Hospital and kids like me. You are changing medicine and changing kids' lives for the better.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
That was a remarkably gratifying project to work on, and it touches the hearts of all of us when we see families with their children who benefit from the Stead Family Children's Hospital. Since the hospital was opened, we have served patients and their families from 99 counties in Iowa, 50 states across the country, and 120,000 patients. So it's really quite something. This image also makes me smile. You see there former President Sally Mason in the front as we were recognizing the Fraternal Order of Eagles Diabetes Research Center. And that's one of the very big ideas that Hawkeyes have helped us support. In every college and every program here at Iowa, our people are making new discoveries that have an impact truly worldwide. Breakthroughs at Iowa span healthcare, space, the sciences, humanities, and the arts. And throughout the years, landmark gifts have helped us advance research that has moved those big ideas from the lab to patients' bedsides and into the classroom. A few examples of other generosity for the healthcare side of the house: the Holden family gift from Williamsburg several years ago to create the Holden Comprehensive Cancer Center. How grateful we are to have that kind of world-class care here at the University of Iowa for all of the many people who are touched by cancer. And then the Fraternal Order of Eagles, the international nonprofit organization who committed $25 million for diabetes research. And then the largest donor in the history of the University of Iowa, the Roy J. Carver Charitable Trust, and the Carver family from Muscatine. The Carver Trust has really made an indelible impact on the university and U of I healthcare, and their long-standing record of support for the Carver College of Medicine's research enterprise has led to advances in the fields of neuroscience, ophthalmology, cardiology, metabolism and obesity, infection and immunity, pulmonology, and many, many other areas of biomedicine. Like the Holden family or Jerry and Mary Joy Stead and other donors, the Carver Trust and the Carver name will be forever linked with significant scientific discoveries and treatments to cure illnesses and to transform lives. Research is also based on curiosity and creativity, and we have a lot of that at the University of Iowa as well. We are gratefully anchored by programs like the Iowa Writers Workshop and the renowned nonfiction writing program, as well as the International Writing Program that Rod mentioned earlier. And students and faculty and graduates are telling the stories of our time and defining the cultural canon through their studies and creation in art, music, literature, and film. I hope all of you have had the opportunity to see some of the ads that we have had about all of the screenwriters who have done so many wonderful television programs from their perch in Hollywood. In addition, Iowa is, of course, committed to offering an accessible and affordable education for everyone. And that's why one of our favorite things to do is to work on donor-funded scholarships and support for academic success that are among our highest priorities. I'm delighted to tell the story here of Lillian Sanchez. Lillian immigrated to Iowa from Mexico with her mother and sister when she was a young child. And after watching her mom work long hours at multiple jobs so that she could save for her daughter's education, Lillian set her sights on the University of Iowa because of its combined quality and affordability. And as the first in her family to attend college, but fortunately not the last, Lillian garnered impressive achievements here at Iowa. She was elected as the first Latina to serve as president of the university's student body, as vice president, and was awarded the Hancher Finkbein Medallion, the university's premier student leadership award. She graduated from the University of Iowa with degrees in political science and ethics and public policy, and her sister, I'm pleased to say, followed her to the University of Iowa as well. Upon graduation, Lillian was named to Amnesty International's Ladis Christoph Fellow before working for then Senator Kamala Harris's office in Washington, D.C. And today she is on Vice President Harris's staff. So this is, of course, just one of tens of thousands of stories that arise from an Iowa education. And the generosity of Hawkeyes help us support those students and provide an academic home for them, as well as a destination in care for patients. Looking ahead, we see a bright future for the University of Iowa, and that's because we have generous folks like you who are part of a strong and engaged network who make dreams possible. I encourage those of you who are with us today to think about ways you can deepen your relationship with Iowa. Each of our speakers has mentioned different things through volunteering, mentoring, giving back, and staying connected. And with your help, Hawkeyes will continue to do remarkable work. As we celebrate this milestone anniversary, particularly this week with the 175th anniversary and the installation of President Wilson on Friday, we're really working to strengthen our core commitments. To support students, the 20% who are first in family to attend college with inclusivity for all, to recruit and retain exceptional faculty across campus, and to protect and support the health and wellness of our campus and the greater community. Backed by the generosity of so many, the University of Iowa will continue to grow and flourish far into the future. Thanks so much for being with us today.
Lynette, thank you so much for taking a few minutes to share with us some really compelling stories that the Center for Advancement has been associated with these past several years, really since your tenure began, and it is deeply appreciated all that you do and what your staff do on behalf of the university. So thank you very much for all that has transpired. Wonderful question from one of our participants. For you, Lynette. During your tenure at Iowa, the campus has changed a lot, not only physically, but new programs that have been developed and new leaders who have come on board with new ideas. And you get to see how your work helps to make that happen. Is there a gift or two? This may be a tough question, I don't know. Is there a gift or two of which you were a part of that were particularly meaningful, important to you?
Well, you're right. That's a very tough question. And as a way of being fair to that, because there are so many really powerful gifts, I want to tell you about one that has come to fruition today. And that is a $2.5 million commitment from the Wingate Foundation to support the Center for the Book. So over the past couple of years, we have had the privilege of working with the Center for the Book and many, many colleagues on campus to raise $2.5 million that the Wingate Foundation is willing to match. And as of today, we were able to get the secured document that records the Wingate Foundation's commitment to the University of Iowa and the Center for the Book. And one of the reasons that's so incredibly special to me is because I think it's such a wonderful confluence of all of the ways that the University of Iowa celebrates and represents writing and books, fiction, poetry, nonfiction, screenwriting, the library, the archives, all of the ways that the written word is cherished and celebrated at the University of Iowa. And it's a program for which a commitment of $5 million can make a profound difference. So that's my favorite one today, David.
That is the best news of the day. Lynette, thank you for sharing that news with us. And that is an absolutely outstanding gift for a treasure on our campus. And I'm sure Tim Barrett will be very pleased to hear about that. Tim is literally a genius. He is a MacArthur genius who was really the linchpin of the center for many years. He retired recently, but I know that he remains very actively interested in the center's fortunes. So wonderful, wonderful news. Thank you, Lynette. Another question. You meet a lot of people through your work. Have you ever met a donor, friend, or celebrity that you were personally nervous to meet?
Oh, for sure. And so there would be two, I would say. The first was Tom Brokaw, and the privilege of working with him over the years as he gave his papers and collection to the university library and to the archives. And what a gentle and generous and fascinating man. And then I think the most recent time that I was absolutely most nervous when I was playing the role that you're playing today, David, in interviewing Marilynne Robinson, because I have such a remarkable admiration and fascination with her. And interviewing her was a privilege, and I just wasn't confident that I could do it justice. So, but she was also equally generous and kind.
I am sure it went well, and I know that she's absolutely a gracious and stellar creative writer and author. Thank you, Lynette. I would like to invite Peter and Rod to come back on, joining us again for wrapping up questions for the three of you. I'm just interested in learning from each of you, from your perspective, what you envision or what you hope to envision will be the University of Iowa over the next 10 years. It's a very open-ended, very broad question. Perhaps, Rod, you might talk about the physical plant, but either of you, any of you, Rod, Peter, or Lynette, feel free to be first.
So I'll give my partners a chance to think of something. And as you said, from the building perspective, we did just share with our Board of Regents a 10-year vision. It's actually a unique picture. The board asked for a 10-year vision, both of the main campus and of the main hospital campus. And it gives us an opportunity to do a couple of things on behalf of our institution and our state to understand that when we have a campus of roughly 250 buildings with an average age of over 46 years of age in our buildings. So every time we add a building, there's another one that's nearly 100 years old. That's a heavy responsibility. And to make sure that those buildings not only aren't risks to our campus, but serve the needs of today's and tomorrow's students and faculty, researchers, the way we teach folks and inspire people on our campus. Those are heavy tasks, but a heavy part of what we're doing in the next 10 years of our development. As I mentioned, taking care of the buildings of the Pentacrest, but so many others. And so caring for our campus, right-sizing our campus to lower costs that aren't necessary so that we can maximize the costs that go into the investments that go into the classroom, go into our students' success and the performance of our students here on campus so they excel as they have beyond our classrooms and beyond their graduation. That is a quick shot at the next decade. We've always looked at when we would curve, and of course the flood threw a big wrench in all of that. And we did quite a bit of work in the aftermath of the flood. We were doing more construction than the city of Minneapolis, but it was out of necessity. We had to recover this campus, and we did. And we're in a good place physically, but we need to care for those buildings that the students learn in, and our researchers advance scholarly works and difference makers for our society.
Thank you, Rod. I remember at one point during Sally Mason's tenure, walking across campus, I took a pedestrian bridge over Riverside, and I looked around as a panoramic view from that point, and I counted no fewer than 14 construction cranes. Now, granted, some of them were in the private sector downtown, but most of them were campus related.
Yeah, officially we had 11. We hit a maximum, so 3 of them must have been private, but we did at a height, we had 11 cranes over the sites on our campus, and it was sounds exciting, but it's a true task when we don't really have that many contractors to do that work. So it was quite a balancing act, but we, like so many other things, we persevered and succeeded, and just look at our campus.
Thanks, Rod. I'm glad to know I'm not the only nerd that counts construction.
No, I was counting them too. I actually got to go up to the top of the highest one and scare myself to death.
Well, you made it back down, thank goodness. Peter, Lynette, either of you like to take that question?
Yeah. Well, so for me, it becomes a very personal journey as to what the next 10 years look like. My oldest daughter is going to be a first-year student next year. And then my youngest, I don't know if she has a whole lot of other choice. She'll be a first-year student in 4 years. So, more or less the next 8, 9 years or 11, depending on how many extra, degrees they go get, it is, for me, it's going to be very personal as to, the success of my daughters. And that goes to the success of the faculty and what they're able to bring and impart upon them. And so as I look at the next decade and what provost and the president have begun working on and laying out and working with Lynette and fundraising, is how do we continue to invest in our current faculty and retain the best, and then recruit the best here. And that's really what I'm excited for as we think about everything that Rod has put together and is laying out for facilities, is equally joined with the long-term strategic plan that the university will lay out come this summer. And those two working together will help to create opportunities for that next generation of students and Hawkeyes.
I think that dovetails nicely with one of the things that I like to remind people of, and that is what I like to call the transformative power of public higher education. And it's been the privilege of all 4 of us to spend our lives in public higher education and to devote our entire careers to that. And as Peter talks about the success of his daughters, I would say, and we are here to help assure the success of the sons and daughters of people who entrust their children to us and who come to get that kind of powerful educational experience. And so from the perspective that we work at in the University of Iowa Center for Advancement, our hope is to engage as many people as are interested and that we can in the life of the University of Iowa, and then to also generate the philanthropy that will help assure that student success. So if a student comes to us underprepared, or if they come to us as a first-generation student who doesn't have family who know what it's like to be at a public university, that we can help them and embrace them and help them be successful. And I fervently hope that in our next comprehensive campaign that the philanthropy that we generate will allow us to do that for generations of Hawkeye students to come.
Thank you, Lynette. Here's a question that any of you could address, and it concerns the arts. Over the past 25 years, there has been a substantial investment in the arts at Iowa, especially buildings like Hancher, Boxman, and now the soon-to-open Stanley Museum of Art. How do the arts fit into Iowa's future growth and prestige?
Gosh, any of us could answer it, right? I mean, it is what makes us it's the difference maker. There are our peers, we have great peer institutions and competitive institutions throughout the Midwest and the United States. And we compare ourselves to universities that have great colleges of business and great colleges of medicine and hospitals and others. And when we measure ourselves against those, we often say, you often hear, and I and our teams work with the challenges of finances at universities, and they're not small challenges in higher education these days. And we punch above what we often say, we punch above our weight at Iowa. We're the smallest demographic in the Big Ten. But what makes us different and jump off the page is what has been shared before. And it is our arts, it is our writing, it is our performing arts, and how we become, as we brag about, to Pete's point, attracting the best students and faculty. We are a little town that pretends it's a big city, and that happens because of our arts. Our architecture that I described simply follows the creativity that has been this university from really its beginning. And so we bleed creativity here, and the arts are the reason, and it is who we are.
Very well said. Thank you, Rod. Question for, again, any of you as staff and not faculty at Iowa. Really, I'll direct this to either Lynette or Peter, give Rod a chance to catch a break. But I would be interested in knowing how either you, Lynette or Peter, work with current students in the course of your jobs.
That's one of our favorite things. So the University of Iowa Center for Advancement is fortunate to have student employees. And in the summer, we have a very comprehensive, almost academic student internship program. We have a student organization called the Student Advancement Network that we work with and introduce to advancement, alumni engagement, and philanthropy. And then we work closely with students who are receiving philanthropic support as we invite them to communicate with the people who have supported scholarships and various things for student organizations. We also work very closely with dance marathon students. So we love the kind of training and the support that Dance Marathon provides for the Stead Family Children's Hospital. And it's really a joy for us to be able to get acquainted each year with that new leadership group and to work with them.
I would just add that we also know, and the data tells us that students who have employment on campus or internships on campus, they persist or are retained at higher rates, meaning that they are able to go as a first year, second year, third year, and complete 4 years of their college education on a much more timely fashion. And so we as leaders at the institution have been talking and working with our Division of Student Life, and they've got a remarkable program called Iowa Grow, which where we've implemented across part of the campus and looking to do even more. It helps to deepen that learning that occurs both inside the classroom and outside the classroom. And as our students engage, for them to be able to understand how what they are doing, whatever it may be, is part of that growth process. And so that's part of the importance of having opportunities to have students as part of the offices that we all work in.
Peter, Lynette, both thank you very much for your responses to that. Students are, after all, the linchpin of the university, and tapping into that and ensuring their participation, it really leads to greater fulfillment in their educational experience here. So thank you both for your responses. Now, Rod, I do have a question for you, and this is the kind of question that I get all the time at my shop. And the participant writes, I'm a proud nursing alumna. What can you share about the College of Nursing building?
Yeah, so, a trivia question. Well,
There you go.
let me top of the head this, and David, you'll probably correct me. Nursing, the building, which is what I would call a soft, brutal building. It was in the era of the concrete. We have some pretty hard, brutal buildings. That one introduced a lot more daylighting and a nice presence over the Iowa River Valley. It was built in 1971. The designer, and again, keep in mind, when we're looking at iconic architects from around the world at that time, it didn't mean that we weren't hiring and working with great Iowans too. Chick Herbert, associated with the Iowa State's School of Architecture, but also the H in HLKB, which eventually became the National Firm of the Year, was the designer in partnership with George Horner, as I mentioned earlier, the university architect, to create that building. And it's been a great host, landlocked building, yes, but a great host for our College of Nursing. And I would be remiss if I didn't point out that the U.S. News and World Report now officially rates and ranks nursing programs nationally. And in their first ranking, the University of Iowa College of Nursing is ranked as a top 10 program in the country. So an attractive and great building on our campus, hosting an unbelievable program. And I will say I'm also very proud that my daughter will be a University of Iowa nursing student starting next year. And she and her two older siblings, like Pete, they were forced to be Hawkeyes, and gladly, and they represent the fifth generation of my family at the University of Iowa, dating back to World War I. So our love of this institution is deep, and I know somebody in my family is going to be spending a lot of time in that great building.
Rod, thank you for the background, and I was not aware of the new ranking system used by U.S. News. That is wonderful news to know, and I think our alumna who submitted that question has even more reason to be proud of her alma mater. Well, thank you all very much. I see we're just about out of time, but I do want to first thank our three featured guests for this afternoon. I certainly learned much from Lynette, Peter, and Rod. Their perspectives really contributed much to my own understanding of our institution, and their outlines of the opportunities before us really came through this afternoon. Let me also thank all of you who joined us today and for each of our 4 sessions this month. Hard to believe, but this is session 4, and we're about to wrap up our podcast series for the month of February. We appreciate your interest in the history and future of the University of Iowa. I would also like to take this opportunity to thank our crew behind the scenes: Heather Walensky, Nikki Bontrager, Tony Hakes, Derek Harrigan, and Ben Hill. Thank you all for making my job incredibly easy, and thank you for your technical and editorial support. Tonight's recording will be uploaded to the University of Iowa Center for Advancement's YouTube page in the weeks to follow, in case you'd like to share it with your friends. We end this series by recognizing that there is indeed much to look forward to in Iowa's future. I can't wait to see what the people of the University of Iowa will accomplish in the years to come. On a personal note, I will just add to the kind words of Lynette, Peter, and Rod earlier. I am indeed retiring from the position of University Archivist 1 week from today, and I am feeling, frankly, very mixed about it right now. It's a decision that I felt was necessary to make room for somebody far more adept with the ever-changing technological landscape of information services. And I realized that there are so many people out there who are far better equipped than I to accommodate that. So it's time to move on. But I am going to stay in Iowa City, and I look forward perhaps to running into you in the Ped Mall sometime. If you're ever back to visit the campus, I hope to at some point catch up and see how you all are doing, because once a Hawkeye, always a Hawkeye, right? Thank you all very much for joining us this evening, and all the best wishes to everyone. Very happy Founders Day coming up on February 25th, and go Hawkeyes.